Okay, we're going to continue the Dionysius of Halicarnassus marathon. So, we continue at 4.1. But before I proceed, I desire to show in a few words that it is not without design and mature premeditation that I have turned to the early part of Rome's history, but that I have well considered reasons to give for my choice to forestall the censure of those who, fond of finding fault with everything and not as yet having heard of any of the matters which I am about to make known, may blame me because, in spite of the fact that this city, grown so famous in our days, had very humble and inglorious beginnings, and worthy of historical record, and that it was but a few generations ago, that is, since her overthrow of the Macedonian powers and her success in the Punic Wars, that she arrived at distinction and glory. Nevertheless, when I was at liberty to choose one of the famous periods in her history for my theme, I turned aside to one so barren of distinction as her antiquarian lore. For to this day almost all the Greeks are ignorant of the early history of Rome, and the great majority of them have been imposed upon by sundry false opinions, grounded upon stories which chance has brought to their ears, and led to believe that, having come upon various vagabonds without house or home, and barbarians, and even those not free men, as her founders, she in the course of time arrived at world domination, and this not through reverence for the gods and justice and every other virtue, but through some chance and the injustice of fortune, which inconsiderately showers her greatest favours upon the most undeserving, and indeed the more malicious are wont to rail openly at fortune for freely bestowing on the basest of barbarians the blessings of the Greeks. And yet, why should I mention men at large, when even some historians have dared to express such views in the writing they have left, taking this method of humouring barbarian kings who detested Rome's supremacy, princes to whom they were ever servilely devoted, and with whom they associated as flatterers, by presenting them with histories in inverted commas which were neither just nor true. In order, therefore, to remove these erroneous impressions, as I have called them, from the minds of many, and to substitute true ones in their room, I shall in this book show who the founders of the city were, at what periods the various groups came together, and through what turns of fortune they left their native countries. By this means I engaged to prove that they were Greeks, and came together from nations not the smallest nor least considerable. And beginning with the next book, I shall tell of the deeds they performed immediately after their founding of the city, and of the customs and institutions by virtue of which their descendants advanced to so great dominion, and, so far as I am able, I shall omit nothing worthy of being recorded in history. To the end that I may instill in the minds of those who shall then be informed of the truth, the fitting conception of this city, unless they have already assumed an utterly violent and hostile attitude toward it, and also that they may never feel indignation at their present subjection, which is grounded on reason. For by an universal law of nature, which time cannot destroy, it is ordained that superiors shall ever govern their inferiors, nor rail at fortune for having wantonly bestowed upon an undeserving city a supremacy so great and already of so long continuance? Particularly when they shall have learned from my history that Rome, from the very beginning, immediately after its founding, produced infinite examples of virtue in men whose superiors, whether for piety or for justice, or for lifelong self-control, or for warlike valour, no city, either Greek or barbarian, has ever produced. This, I say, is what I hope to accomplish, if my readers will but lay aside all resentment, for some such feeling is aroused by a promise of things which run counter to received opinion or excite wonder. And it is a fact that all those Romans who bestowed upon their country so great a dominion are unknown to the Greeks for want of a competent historian. For no accurate history of the Romans written in Greek language has hitherto appeared, but only very brief and summary epitomes. The first historian, so far as I am aware, to touch upon the early period of the Romans was Hieronymus of Cardia in his work on the Epigoni. After him, Timaeus of Sicily related the beginnings of their history in his general history and treated in a separate work the wars with Pyrrhus of Epirus. Besides these, Antigonus, Polybius, Silenus, and innumerable other authors devoted themselves to the same themes, though in different ways, each of them recording some few things compiled without accurate investigation on his own part, but from reports which chance had brought to his ears. Like to these in all respects are the histories of those Romans, also, who related in Greek the early achievements of the city. The oldest of these writers are Quintus Fabius and Lucius Cincius, who both flourished during the Punic Wars. Each of these men related the events at which he himself had been present with great exactness, as being well acquainted with them, but touched only in a summary way upon the early events that followed the founding of the city. For these reasons, therefore, I have determined not to pass over a noble period of history which the older writers left untouched, a period, moreover, the accurate portrayal of which will lead to the following most excellent and just results. In the first place, the brave men who have fulfilled their destiny will gain immortal glory and be extolled by posterity, which fiends render human nature like upon the divine and prevent men's deeds from perishing together with their bodies. And again, both the present and future descendants of those godlike men will choose not the pleasantest and easiest of lives, but rather the noblest and most ambitious, when they consider that all who are sprung from an illustrious origin ought to set a high value on themselves and indulge in no pursuit unworthy of their ancestors. And I, who have not turned aside to this work for the sake of flattery, but out of a regard for truth and justice, which ought to be the aim of every history, shall have an opportunity, in the first place, of expressing my attitude of goodwill toward all good men and toward all who take pleasure in the contemplation of great and noble deeds, and in the second place, of making the most grateful return that I may to the city and other blessings I have enjoyed during my residence in it. Having first given the reason for my choice of subject, I wish now to say something concerning the sources for which I used for preparing for my task, for it is possible that those who have already read Hieronymus, Timaeus, Polybius, or any of the other historians whom I just now mentioned as having slurred over their work, since they will not have found in those authors many things mentioned by me, will suspect me of inventing them, and will demand to know how I came by the knowledge of these particulars. Lest any one, therefore, should entertain such an opinion of me, it is best that I should state in advance what narratives and records I have used as sources. I arrived in Italy at the very time that Augustus Caesar put an end to the civil war, in the middle of the 187th Olympiad, and having from that time to this present day, a period of 22 years, lived at Rome, learned the language of the Romans, and acquainted myself with their writings, I have devoted myself during all that time to matters bearing upon my subject. Some information I received orally from men of the greatest learning, with whom I associated, and the rest I gathered from histories written by the approved Roman authors, Porcius Cato, Fabius Maximus, Valerius Antius, Licinius Macer, Laeli, Gelli, and Calpurni, and many others of note, with these works, which are like the Greek analytic accounts, as a basis I set about the writing of my history. So much then concerning myself, but it yet remains for me to say something also concerning the history itself, to what periods I limit it, what subjects I describe, and what form I give to the work. I begin my history then with the most ancient legends, which the historians before me have omitted as a subject difficult to be cleared up with diligent study. And I bring the narrative down to the beginning of the First Punic War, which fell in the third year of the 128th Olympiad. I relate all the foreign wars that the city waged during that period, and all the internal seditions with which she was agitated, showing from what causes they sprang, and by what methods, and by what arguments they were brought to an end. I give an account also of all the forms of government Rome used, both during the monarchy and after its overthrow, and show what was the character of each. I describe the best customs and the most remarkable laws, and in short, I show the whole life of the ancient Romans. As to the form I give this work, it does not resemble that which the authors who make wars alone their subject have given to their histories, nor that which others who treat of the several forms of government by themselves have adopted, nor is it like the analytic accounts which the authors of Attides have published, for these are monotonous and soon grow tedious to the reader, but it is a combination of every kind, forensic, speculative, and narrative, to the intent that it may afford satisfaction both to those who occupy themselves with political debates and to those who are devoted to philosophical speculations, as well as to any who may desire mere undisturbed entertainment in the reading of history. Such things, therefore, will be the subjects of my history, and as such will be its form. I, the author, am Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the son of Alexander, and at this point I begin. So, interesting that he thinks that the ancient Romans were originally Greeks, rather than the Roman tradition of being Trojans. It's kind of ironic, given that there was a TikToker who years ago claimed that the Romans didn't exist, they were all Greeks, which is clearly not the case, they were Latins. But obviously there's some truth in what Dionysius says insofar as the south of Italy was colonized by the Greeks, and the Greeks, along with the Etruscans, were a big influence on the wild Latin shepherds who became the Romans. And that's what actually happened. They weren't Greeks, but they were influenced by the Greeks. So, with this, I finished this particular video, and I'll be doing various other topics which I've been covering and plan to cover, and I'll continue also with the Dionysius of Halicarnassus Roman Antiquities Marathon. Very well, and hope you have a good day.